Hello, Linda. Ken's funeral is about to start. You're not really planning on not coming, are you? Excuse me, what are you talking about? Ken has passed away. You got a call from Marissa yesterday, right? I'm coming to pick you up, so get ready. It's been 3 years since I divorced my husband. Out of the blue, I received a call from my mother-in-law, whom I hadn't been in touch with for years, telling me to attend my ex-husband's funeral. Logically, it makes no sense to invite an ex-wife to her former husband's funeral after several years have passed. But what does she mean by, "You got a call from Marissa"? My ex-husband was supposed to have died a year ago. Happening to be off from work, I, confused and not understanding the situation, got dressed in mourning clothes just in case. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang insistently. Come on, we're going. It's outrageous not to show up at the funeral of a husband you once relied on, even if you're divorced. That funeral? You mean the first anniversary, right? My mother-in-law frowned. What? The funeral is about to start. Why would it be the first anniversary? Why am I not on the same page with my mother-in-law? A year ago, I was directly informed by Marissa, my ex-husband's current wife, of his passing. My husband passed away. I didn't contact you because I didn't want you to attend the funeral. But since you came to pay your respects, I thought I should let you know. At that time, I put $200 into a condolence envelope I had at home, intending it for incense money, and handed it over. When I mentioned this, my mother-in-law clicked her tongue quietly and furrowed her brows even more deeply. Just get in the car. Where's Alex? I'm not bringing Alex. I don't want him to see. Marissa. Without saying anything more, my mother-in-law put me in the passenger seat and headed straight for the funeral home. With the early passing of my ex-husband as the starting point, I was clueless about what was happening, yet I was being dragged into an unimaginable situation. I'm Linda, 35 years old, a single mother with a 3-year-old son, supported by my parents. I live at home and work as an office worker at a local real estate management company. Now, I find the lively and enjoyable child rearing at my parents' home fulfilling. But when my husband demanded a divorce 3 years ago, I felt as though my world had ended. Who could have imagined being abandoned right after giving birth, with a newborn in tow? Now, I'm grateful that I was able to start raising my child at my parents' house immediately after being discharged from the hospital, living happily ever since. I met my ex-husband through my aunt's introduction. Linda, there's a wonderful person I think you should meet. My aunt, who's close with my mom, occasionally comes over for chats. Without any preamble, she dropped this suggestion, nearly causing me to spit out my tea in surprise. My aunt runs a small restaurant and is known among her patrons as the matchmaking aunt, having successfully paired off several couples who ended up getting married. There's a relative of a regular customer, a son who's over 35 and still hasn't had any marriage prospects. I had him come to the restaurant once, and I must say he's not only good-looking but also has a great personality. Plus, he works at a major company. It was clear that my aunt was highly recommending him. She first approached me, a single woman past 30, with this proposal. While I wasn't actively seeking a relationship, I was aware of my unremarkable and dull existence. Out of respect for my aunt, I decided to take a leap and go along with her suggestion. On the day, as I headed to the hotel lounge where we agreed to meet, my future husband was already there, waiting. True to my aunt's word, he was a handsome man in a well-fitted suit with a refreshing smile. After exchanging greetings, he asked me with a somewhat serious look, "Do you seriously consider marriage, Linda?" Not fully understanding his intention, I decided to be honest. I'm not against the idea, but to be honest, I came today to honor my aunt's request. Hearing that, my husband let out a relieved sigh and said, "That's good." He was 3 years older than me, not in a rush to get married, and like me, had come to meet out of respect for a relative's wishes. Perhaps freed from the pressure of matchmaking, we both relaxed, and conversation flowed naturally between us. Maybe that was a good sign. It's strange how fate works. Two people with no initial intention of marrying ended up getting married within a year. From the beginning of our marriage, my husband's work kept him busy, often coming home late at night. I hadn't dreamed of a sweet honeymoon phase, but it felt lonely starting our life together with him, rarely around. I'm sorry it's like this even though we're newlyweds. I believe this is a critical time for me to work hard, so I hope you can bear with it. I'll let you know on the days I can come home, so don't worry about preparing meals for me. Otherwise, I don't have experience working in a large corporation, but according to him, socializing is crucial for advancement. I understand, but don't overdo it, okay? Yeah, thank you. The loneliness I felt during the weekday initially soon became normal, and I found myself getting used to it after just a month. Not having to rush home from work to prepare dinner was a relief. Moreover, my husband made sure to be home on weekends, valuing our time together by going out or dining together. Our relationship with my in-laws was, for better or worse, almost non-existent. You're married and a separate household now, so you two should make your decisions. From our initial greeting, my in-laws were indifferent and never interfered in our affairs. In a way, I think our marriage started off smoothly. Nearly a year into our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. I'm happy, my husband said, but his demeanor became more distant as days passed. As my pregnancy progressed, he started to spend weekends away from home, leaving me alone more frequently. The severe morning sickness and quitting my job due to the pregnancy were significant factors. Hey, let's go look at baby stuff soon. We need to start getting ready. I've got something on this weekend. You go ahead, pick whatever you like. Perhaps it was the hormonal changes making me emotionally unstable, but every time he said things like that, I felt a surge of sadness. Hey, this is your child too. Let's think about this together. Come on, I'm busy, you know. It's your child too, so you should prepare yourself. You have time during the day, so just go by yourself. Every time I brought up the topic of our child, my husband became increasingly irritable and raised his voice. Even though I realized a gap was forming between us, I felt powerless to do anything about it. Yet at that time, I still believed that the birth of our child would bring about a change in him. When labor started, my husband was nowhere to be found, despite numerous attempts to contact him. There was no response to my calls or messages. I called my mother and then headed to the hospital by taxi, where I safely gave birth to a boy. After waking up, I contacted my husband again, and he said, "Well done. It's pointless for me to be there now, isn't it? Let me know when you're being discharged. I'll come to pick you up." Hearing that provided me with a bit of relief. During my hospital stay, both my parents and my in-laws came to see the baby, taking turns holding him and saying, "He's so cute." Even my usually indifferent in-laws seemed genuinely happy at that moment. Although I was surrounded by happiness, the one person I wished most to be there, my husband, was absent. In the end, my husband never visited the hospital, not even once, and I found myself unable to share my feelings or seek advice from anyone. On the day of discharge, my husband came to pick me up from the hospital room at the time I had told him. As soon as he entered the room, I handed him our sleeping son without a word. For a moment my husband looked surprised, but then silently stared at his face, standing still. "The name's Alex, right? Hoping for a bright future." I was surprised that my husband had thought of a name for our son. I thought it was a good name. Surely everything will be okay. At that moment, I couldn't help but believe that a fun and happy future with our baby awaited us. However, my hopes were shattered in an instant. Returning home for the first time in a week, I found a pair of high heels with ribbons I had never seen before at the entrance. Entering the living room, there was a young woman wearing a short dress. I want a divorce. I've realized I don't want children after all. Without a chance to sit down, my husband said this and thrust divorce papers in front of me. Why didn't you say something sooner? The child is already born, and why bring me all the way here if you wanted a divorce? It can't be helped, right? Marissa said she wanted to meet you and apologize. I felt dizzy hearing my husband say this with a smirk on his face. I thought it might be nice to have a family and make a home for the sake of my career, but when I actually saw the pregnancy, I just felt like I couldn't handle it. What is he even talking about? Wait, what do you mean? So you're saying the marriage itself was for the sake of your career? That's right. You were the type to obediently follow what I said. It was convenient having you around, not just for companionship, but like a housekeeper for my needs, while I still wanted to have my fun. I stared at my husband in disbelief. But I just can't do the kid thing. I don't want my time taken up by children. I was so shocked I couldn't find the words to respond. I had no idea he was this kind of person. I never imagined his late nights were spent with other women. The memories of what I thought were 2 happy years of marriage suddenly seemed tainted. Well, I did learn that being married helps with social credibility. So I've decided to remarry this one who agrees with me on not wanting kids. Plus, she's prettier than you. With that, my husband pulled the woman closer by the shoulder. I'll pay you alimony and child support around the standard rate. Just send me the bill or whatever later. I'm really sorry it's come to this, ma'am, the woman said with a smug look, her apology lacking any sincerity. She probably wanted to see my devastated face. That's why, in front of this woman alone, I refused to let myself cry. The poor baby being born into this. Really so sad. Feeling infuriated by her pitiful gaze directed at my son, I snatched the divorce papers my husband was holding out. I'll file these myself. Filled with misery, I wanted nothing more than to leave that place as quickly as possible. I'll send your stuff to your parents' house later. Thanks for everything until now. Bye-bye. Good luck being a single mom. Every word from that irritating woman made me want to punch her. But I silently turned and walked towards the entrance. The cardboard boxes stacked in the Japanese-style room next to the entrance were probably my belongings. They're all set to get rid of me. Holding my baby, I suppressed my frustration and left the familiar apartment behind. Despite my initial fury, by the time I reached my parents' house, I was utterly dejected and emotionless. With a blank expression, I started to explain what had happened, and my parents exploded with emotion on my behalf. "That idiot!" My father's face, red with anger and ready to storm out and confront my husband, was held back by my mother and me. My father's anger was so intense, it seemed unlikely that merely hitting someone would satisfy him. As I tried to hold him back, tears naturally started to fall. "Damn it!" I was overwhelmed by frustration, sadness, anger, and despair. All the emotions I had been suppressing surged forth, and before I knew it, I found myself crying uncontrollably like a child. It was only when both my parents hugged me and cried with me that I began to regain my composure. I decided to inform my in-laws of the divorce over the phone. It pained my heart, especially since they had been happy about their grandchild's birth at the hospital just the other day. "So, if that's what you two have decided, I won't say anything. It's a shame about the grandchild. I'm sorry for what Ken did to you," my mother-in-law apologized. But she did not suggest trying to mend the marriage. Perhaps her son's marriage and his affairs were never truly of concern to my in-laws from the start. Afterward, through a lawyer, I filed for alimony and child support, and the divorce was finalized without issue. The alimony for both of us was transferred in one lump sum by my husband. He probably wanted to settle everything quickly to move on with his remarriage. We agreed on a child support payment of $800 every month, but there was no demand for visitation rights with our son. Realizing he truly had no interest in our child, I felt a clear sense of closure. Thus, our marriage ended unceremoniously after just 2 years. After the divorce, I moved back to my parents' house with my son, Alex. Currently, I'm working as an office worker at a real estate management company nearby, thanks to a referral from my father's acquaintance. According to what my aunt told me, my ex-husband and his affair partner remarried almost immediately after our divorce was finalized. I named our son Alex because in that moment at the hospital, it seemed like the one genuine thing my ex-husband expressed. I hope for a bright future for this child, and even if we never see his father again, I wanted to tell my son that he was loved by his father. A year after the divorce, when I had almost forgotten about him, I received a call from my ex-husband. I hadn't deleted his contact information because of the child support. Sorry to call out of the blue after such a long time. There's something I'd like to talk about. Can we meet? Hearing my ex-husband's voice for the first time in a year, it sounded dark and lifeless, as if he were a different person. Sensing the seriousness of the situation, I agreed to meet him at a cafe near my parents' house after work the next day. Actually, I've been diagnosed with an illness. It's already in a bad state. It's ridiculous that I didn't notice anything wrong with my own body until it got to this point, he said, with a weak smile, leaving me at a loss for words. So I might not be able to provide child support going forward. That's why I want to make our son the beneficiary of my life insurance. I was taken aback by his sudden offer, but I nodded silently to his earnest expression. Leaving a large sum of money to Marissa wouldn't do any good, he muttered under his breath. Driven by curiosity, I couldn't help but ask, "What did you see in her? Was it her looks?" Yeah, that was part of it, but despite appearances, she had her diligent moments. She seemed to understand what men wanted, knew how to reach out where it itched. Though now I realized that was just her way of snagging a man. His response made sense to me. I had never believed he was someone to marry solely based on appearances, but from the way he spoke, it seemed Marissa had outplayed him. Facing death. I've finally had the chance to reflect on my pointless life. The only thing of value I ever did was marrying you and bringing our child into this world in the quiet cafe. Only the sound of him sniffing echoed. I did something terrible to you back then. I'm an idiot for not realizing it until it came to this. I'm truly sorry. This is the only way I can make amends now. I could feel the sincerity in my husband's words. All right, make Alex the beneficiary. He's named Alex. When I nodded, my husband, unconcerned about the onlookers, began to cry out loud. I felt a slight relief knowing that he indeed had a heart. Later we met again to sign and stamp the documents as the legal guardian. While I pitied my husband, I also thought it was divine retribution and felt he deserved it. Even at that moment, half a year later, he informed me that he was going to be hospitalized. A few days after, I decided to take this as a final goodbye and went to visit him with our son. Thinking it might be the last time, my husband was significantly more emaciated than when I last saw him, but he smiled upon seeing Alex. You've grown so much, Alex, thanks to being taken around by his grandparents. Alex, who wasn't shy around strangers, smiled back at my husband. I'm really sorry, such a cute kid. I was truly an idiot, it's my karma," as my husband cried, his face scrunched up. Alex gently patted him, comforting him. If only he had realized what was truly important sooner, my husband might have found happiness watching the two of them. The hatred I had for my husband seemed to disappear. However, as I left the hospital room and was descending to the first floor in the elevator, I encountered the last person I wanted to see. "Hey, why are you here?" Marissa was there, wearing those ribbon-adorned high heels. I remembered the humiliation I felt back then, resurfaced from the depths of my heart. "I was informed, so I came to see my son for the last time." Marissa glared at me and Alex with disdain. "Even though you were dumped, don't you ever come back. If you do, I won't let it go." With those parting words, she boarded the elevator we had just exited and went back up. Although it was infuriating, I understood that it wouldn't feel good for an ex-wife and her child to visit unexpectedly. After that incident, I never went to the hospital again, nor did I intend to see them. But then, 3 months later, Marissa unexpectedly showed up at my parents' house. "Sorry for the sudden visit. My husband passed away. I didn't contact you because I didn't want you at the funeral. But since you came to visit him, I thought I should let you know." "Is that so? My condolences." "Thank you for letting me know." Even though I had braced myself for it, the news of my once-beloved husband's death weighed heavily on me. "From now on, please don't contact me or my in-laws again. I never want to see your face again." "Yes, of course. Oh, just one moment, please." I went inside and put $200 into a condolence envelope from a drawer, then handed it to Marissa. "Please use this for flowers." Marissa's face twisted sourly for a moment, but after receiving the envelope, she bowed slightly and left. I thought this marked the complete end of my relationship with my husband. However, a year later, a call from my former mother-in-law entangled us in an unimaginable situation. The phone rang on a day when I was home alone, enjoying my day off. "Hello, is this Linda? Ken's funeral is about to start. You surely don't plan on not coming, do you?" "Excuse me, what are you talking about? Ken has passed away. You were contacted by Marissa yesterday, weren't you? I'm coming to pick you up, so be ready and wait at the entrance." 3 years had passed since my divorce from my husband. The sudden call from my mother-in-law, with whom I hadn't been in contact, took me by surprise. Moreover, my ex-husband was supposed to have died a year ago. Confused, I nevertheless changed into mourning clothes and prepared to leave. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang incessantly. "Come on, we're going. It's outrageous not to attend the funeral of a husband who treated you well, even if you're divorced." "That funeral, you mean the first anniversary, right?" My mother-in-law frowned. "What? The funeral is about to start. Why would it be the first anniversary? Why isn't our conversation aligning?" A year ago, Marissa, my ex-husband's current wife, had personally informed me of his death. I had even handed over a condolence envelope with $200 in it. When I mentioned this, my mother-in-law clicked her tongue quietly, and her frown deepened. "Just get in the car. Where's Alex?" "Alex isn't coming. I don't want him to see Marissa." Without saying anything more, my mother-in-law put me in the passenger seat, and we headed straight for the funeral home. Logically, it's strange to invite an ex-wife who has been separated for several years to a funeral. Between my mother-in-law and Marissa, whose story was true, caught in this unbelievable scenario, I was desperate to know the truth. Upon arriving at the funeral home, a monk had just begun the chanting. The funeral hall was small, indicating a service only for close family members. My husband's portrait was displayed on the altar. It indeed appeared to be my husband's funeral today. Feeling as if I'd been caught in an absurd twist, I couldn't help but let out a rueful smile. The funeral proceeded without issue. And as we waited for the departure of the hearse, Marissa approached me aggressively. "Hey, why are you here? Didn't I tell you never to show your face again? Why are you attending without being invited?" As always, Marissa's way of speaking was infuriating. "I was the one who called her. Didn't I tell you that I would contact Linda? What use is your head?" "I didn't want her here at the funeral," my mother-in-law sighed deeply, frowning. "You lied about Ken dying a year ago and even accepted condolence money from Linda. Is there another reason you were so adamant about her not coming?" Marissa's face tensed for a moment, and I could hear her swallow hard. "Linda, I invited you today because I thought you deserved to say thank you and farewell to Ken, considering how well he treated you. You were taken care of, so it seemed right to express gratitude and see him off." I tilted my head, confused by what my mother-in-law was saying. Despite receiving child support every month, didn't she always demand more? It was clear that Marissa was beginning to panic. Even though it wasn't hot, she was sweating profusely on her forehead. Yes, that's right. Since she was getting child support from him every month, she should pay her respects properly. "But look, the funeral is over now, so you can go home. We'll say our goodbyes with just the family. Now come on, it's time for you to leave." Marissa, while making insistent gestures, tried to hurry me out by pushing on my back. Her actions were so unnatural that I started to understand the meaning behind my mother-in-law's frowns and questioning. She must have been suspecting Marissa all along. I shrugged off Marissa's hand and turned squarely to face my mother-in-law. "What additional child support? I haven't received anything beyond the agreed amount. I haven't been in contact with him for a long time." My mother-in-law's expression turned thunderous in an instant. "So you've been deceiving us all along. You complained about Linda's demands being too high, so I've been sending you $1,000 every month, and you've been pocketing all of it. I never imagined Marissa was exploiting me to extort money from my in-laws." Cornered by my mother-in-law and me, Marissa, realizing she couldn't make excuses, defiantly started to lash out. "It's not my fault. He earned a lot, but never let me spend freely. And it seems he had other women until he fell ill. I'm the one who was deceived. My husband did have a good salary from his job at a large corporation, but even when we were married, he only gave me a fixed monthly allowance. I never struggled financially, but his infidelity was undeniable. You could have lived comfortably without your extravagance, couldn't you? Ken said you were a useless money pit. Apparently you hardly did any housework and spent your time gallivanting around. Ah, enough. Be quiet. It's his fault for not letting me have freedom. It's only natural for you in-laws to support me when your daughter-in-law is struggling." Finally, Marissa's true feelings came out. "His inheritance rightfully belongs to me, his wife. Now I can finally have my freedom, so don't just invite his ex-wife as you please." The reason Marissa didn't want me at the funeral was all about the inheritance. For Marissa, the idea of my son, my husband's legitimate child, receiving any inheritance was something she desperately wanted to avoid. The relatives waiting for the departure of the hearse were frowning and whispering among themselves. Hearing the commotion, my father-in-law came over and apologized to me. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this mess. I'll get in touch on another day, so it's okay for you to head home now. Thank you for coming." Turning my back on the still arguing mother-in-law and Marissa, I left without waiting for the hearse to depart, feeling entangled in an unfortunate situation. I hoped this would be the end, but I couldn't shake off a bad feeling. Unfortunately, my intuition would prove correct in the coming months. Nearly 3 months later, something unthinkable happened. It was a holiday, and we had gone to a large park with a packed lunch. The park, essentially a vast forest, was bustling with families and couples. Alex, now 3 years old, was energetically tireless, with my parents and me taking turns keeping up with his play. While my dad and I were lying on the leisure sheet, my mom, who had gone with Alex to the playground, came back panicked. "Alex is missing. Hurry up." Alarmed by her frantic demeanor, we all rushed over, but couldn't find Alex around the slide where he had been playing. He slid down once and went back up to slide again, so I waited below, but he never came back down. The large athletic-style slide was crowded with children that day, with kids disappearing inside momentarily. Instead of focusing on the slide, I expanded my view and scanned the surroundings again. Then I spotted Alex's yellow hat as he was walking along a path beyond the playground. It appeared he was being led by a woman I didn't recognize. "Alex!" Hearing my shout, Alex stopped and looked back, and at that moment the woman holding his hand started to run with him in her arms. "Wait!" Before I could start running, my father, who jogs as a hobby, had already sprinted ahead. My heart raced with fear, making it hard to run as I wanted. I called out to my father ahead, "Dad, they're heading towards the parking lot." My father increased his speed and shouted for help. "Someone, please stop that woman. She's kidnapping a child." The woman reached her car, trying to throw Alex into the passenger seat and get into the driver's seat herself, but she was unable to. Several young dads, responding to my father's cries, managed to grab the woman just as she was about to get into the car. "Alex!" After my father took the sobbing Alex out of the passenger seat, he handed him over to me, who had arrived shortly after, relieved. I collapsed to the ground, hugging Alex tightly. "Don't interfere. Because of that kid, I don't get any money. If only he wasn't there. If only he would disappear." The woman was Marissa. Her eyes were bloodshot, and the way she screamed, spitting and raging, was clearly deranged. Trembling, I couldn't say anything back, just watched as the out-of-control Marissa was taken away by the arriving police car. Later, my father-in-law contacted me to apologize and discuss the receipt of my ex-husband's life insurance. It seemed my in-laws had been informed by my husband to proceed in this manner, but they had kept it a secret from Marissa until discussions about the inheritance could be held. Apart from the life insurance, Marissa was to inherit everything else, but it turned out there wasn't much of an estate left. The substantial alimony paid out for our divorcee 3 years prior and the expenses for his illness had left little money. However, there wasn't just one insurance policy, and Marissa must have received a significant sum, at least in the hundreds of thousands. Marissa had been splurging on young hosts. You see, she's always been reckless with money, and it seems she had a considerable amount of debt. She likely used the inheritance to pay off her debts, but it's unclear if she managed to settle them all. My father-in-law sighed deeply, sounding exasperated. More than anything, she couldn't stand knowing the amount of insurance money left for Alex. The insurance money my husband left to Alex was $400,000. It seems Marissa naively believed that if the beneficiary, Alex, were to pass away, the insurance money would automatically go to her. Items such as adhesive tape, rope, and a knife were found in Marissa's car, and during police interrogation, she reportedly confessed to planning to kidnap and kill Alex. Recalling Marissa's deranged look at that moment sends shivers down my spine even now. Perhaps their overbearing love swung from excessive interference to non-interference. We interfered too much in Ken's life out of love. It seems our relationship worsened around the time he went to college, so we learned to keep our opinions to ourselves and respect the decisions of our adult son, they said. But we should have been there for Alex. We should have supported you more. I'm truly sorry. Finally, my mother-in-law added. Alex was the name of Ken's childhood friend from a family that respected his own decisions, unlike ours. He's fulfilling his childhood dream of being a pilot now. She dabbed her nose with a handkerchief. So I think Ken wanted Alex to have a life like his friends. Thank you for keeping the name my son suggested for our grandson. There's no doubt that the moment my husband first held our child, he wished for a happy future for him. Just knowing that was more than enough for me. While I can't forgive what my husband did, I no longer harbor any hatred towards him. Considering the future, our family has decided to move to my mother's hometown, which is a plane ride away. It seems Marissa won't be getting out from behind bars anytime soon, but truly, I never want to see her face again. We were dragged into an unbelievable situation, but it brought some clarity. Someday I want to tell Alex, your dad truly wished for your happiness. Moving forward, our family of 4 intends to live happily, respecting each other's decisions.
My savings, which I have accumulated through hard work since my single days, were meant to be untouched for our children's future. I never expected those savings to be used for such a thing. Just because we're married doesn't mean anything goes. My name is Alyssa, and I'm 32 years old. I married Greg when I was 24. And I got pregnant soon after. We now have 2 children. My son is 7 and my daughter is 5. Both are growing up healthy without any major illnesses. When my daughter turned 3, I returned to my previous job. 2 years have passed since I resumed work, and now I earn about the same salary as Greg. Since he only contributes the bare minimum to our living expenses, I have to save for myself and our children from my own salary. I really wish Greg would cooperate more. However, whenever I bring up money, he always looks annoyed and even gets grumpy with the children. So, I've stopped talking about money in front of him. Then one day, my sister-in-law Megan came to our house. I happened to be working from home that day. Alyssa, please. Let me stay with you for a while. As soon as I opened the door, Megan burst into tears and clung to me. Confused by the suddenness, I was perplexed. Wait, what's going on? My husband wants a divorce. What? A divorce. Megan was still single when Greg and I got married. And she only got married a year ago to a man who seemed very kind and worked for a corporation. They looked so happy at their wedding. But now, just a year later, they are talking about divorce. I couldn't just leave her crying, so I let her into the house. I decided to hear her out first. Well, Megan, I know it's tough, but why suddenly a divorce? Sniffling, Megan opened up. I haven't done anything wrong. But he suddenly says he can't stand living with me anymore. Isn't that terrible? What? Your husband said that. Don't you think it's awful? You must think I'm pitiable, right, Alyssa? She pressed me intensely, making me feel undue pressure. However, it's hard to believe that her kind husband would propose divorce without any reason. I managed to calm her down and decided to wait for Greg to come home from work. When Greg returned, we put the kids to bed and started discussing with Megan. So, Megan, why has it come to divorce? As Greg asked, Megan began crying again. I want to know that too. I've been working hard for him all this time. And yet, he says, it's impossible to live with you. Isn't that cruel? Despite her saying that, there's no way her husband would come up with such an idea without a reason. Listening to her alone won't solve anything. Megan has always had a selfish and willful side. That might be why this divorce is happening. Well, Megan, are you sure there's really no reason at all? Your husband isn't the type to be unreasonable. As I gently defended her husband, Megan glared at me sharply. What, Alyssa? Are you taking his side over mine? I've been working hard as a wife. And yet he's pushing me towards divorce. No. It's not about taking sides. But I doubt he would bring up divorce without any reason. What do you know about him, Alyssa? You're defending him too much. After a pause, Megan looked at me suspiciously. Oh, don't tell me, Alyssa, you're not having an affair with him, are you? What? No way. Oh my, the conversation has taken a strange turn. Of course. There's nothing untoward between Megan's husband and me. I don't even have his contact information. Thankfully, Greg also chimed in. Megan, that's not possible. Don't worry. And I felt a bit relieved. Still, it's curious. Despite Megan claiming she worked hard as a wife, she is vague about why she is facing divorce. I asked Greg to urgently invite his brother over. Megan had already left, saying she didn't want to meet him. Upon arrival, Megan's husband apologized right away, saying, Sorry for causing trouble for you too. I decided to delve into the details because it seemed unlikely. Such a reasonable person would ask for a divorce without cause. Well, I'm sorry to ask so suddenly, but why did you bring up divorce with Megan? Megan's husband looked troubled and looked down. Did you perhaps cheat on her? Hey, Greg. How can you say such a thing? I scolded Greg for his inappropriate comment. After a moment, Megan's husband finally spoke up. Actually, Megan has spent all of my savings, about $50,000. $50,000. I exclaimed, shocked by the amount. He hadn't been upfront because it involved money, which isn't a pretty topic. $50,000. What did she spend it on? I asked cautiously, and he sighed deeply. I asked her, but she only said it was for living expenses. I've been giving her a fixed amount every month for living expenses. But she said it wasn't enough. Feeling apologetic, I thought to myself, it's believable Megan would do this. Because she had also nonchalantly asked us for money during her single days. She'd say, we're family, right, and even went through my wallet without asking. Knowing this side of Megan, I found her husband's story all too plausible. He slumped in disappointment. If she can explain what she spent my savings on and agrees to repay it, I'd consider pausing the divorce. But she keeps insisting it was for living expenses. I felt terribly sorry for Megan's husband. They don't even have children. And he was giving Megan an allowance. It's suspicious that she spent $50,000 in just a year. Eventually, Greg spoke up. So, if she returns the money, the divorce could be avoided? Yeah. Got it, I'll talk to her about it. Greg took on the responsibility, but I wondered how Megan, a homemaker, planned to repay the money. I wondered if he was going to repay in place of her. After sending Megan's husband off, Megan returned home. What happened? What did he say? As Megan bombarded him with questions, Greg confidently replied, If you return the $50,000 you spent, he won't ask for a divorce. To which Megan firmly responded, How could I possibly have that kind of money? I only used it for living expenses and did nothing wrong. It's unclear if Megan really spent it all on living expenses. But her insistence that she's completely blameless is troubling. Megan's husband's decision to propose divorce seems reasonable. Just then, Greg said something outrageous. Don't worry, Megan, Alyssa has lots of savings. What? I exclaimed involuntarily as my money was taken for granted. Megan's eyes lit up as she turned to me. Really? Alyssa, you should have said something sooner. No way, this is wrong. What are they even saying? Especially Greg, damn husband. He can't just decide to use someone else's savings. After cursively reprimanding them in my mind, I calmed down and firmly declined. Well, I can't lend you my savings. If you really need money, ask Greg. Upon hearing this, Greg inexplicably lashed out. Hey Alyssa. Megan is really struggling. Don't you want to help her? Exactly, Alyssa. With your savings, I could avoid divorcing my husband. Both Greg and Megan were now spouting nonsense, proving they were indeed siblings. I genuinely sympathized with Megan's husband and thought it might be better for him to get a divorce sooner rather than later. Greg, not liking my stance, exploded again. Are you serious, Alyssa? When my sister, our family, is struggling, you can't even lend just $50,000. Just $50,000. When he said that, something inside me snapped. I felt my body heat up as anger surged through me. Just $50,000. Don't be ridiculous. This money, I saved up from my single days. Why should I use it for your sister who squandered her husband's money? I've always said it's for our children's future. I managed to hold back my trembling body. Megan stood there with her mouth agape, overwhelmed. Greg looked shocked but quickly retorted. Well, you can just save up again. Megan needs that money now. Are you kidding me? I don't care. I spat back fiercely. Then you lend her the money if it's so important. You're her real sibling. And isn't it embarrassing to ask your wife to solve your sister's problems? What? Greg turned red with anger, biting his lip, unable to respond. Fine. I want a divorce from such a heartless woman. Divorce? You mean you and me? That's right. I don't need a heartless woman who won't help family. Suddenly, he rummaged through a drawer and pulled out divorce papers. He signed them and stamped them right in front of me. Here, sign this quickly. So he kept such documents just in case. I was worried about our children. Taking them away from their father was concerning. He smirked at me, perhaps thinking I wouldn't go through with it. You can't do it, can you? You wouldn't dare become a single mother suddenly. Would you? Better to lend my sister the $50,000, right? At that moment, everything became irrelevant. I was done. Better to be a single mother than to deal with such ridiculous siblings. I signed the divorce papers and stamped them. What? Alyssa. He seemed truly shocked that I had signed. Tomorrow, I'll file these. I started packing my things and the kids silently. Greg, panicking, asked, Alyssa, you're really going to file that? Of course. Why wouldn't I? Why so casually? Didn't you give it to me to sign first? Well, yes, but... The next morning, I submitted the divorce papers to the court first thing. Greg and Megan probably hadn't slept much, as they looked completely worn out. I told the children, let's go to Grandpa and Grandma's house, and prepared them for the move. It seemed cruel to suddenly tell them about the divorce, especially since they are still so young. I planned to explain things to them calmly and simply once we had settled down a bit. When I was leaving with the children, Greg had tears in his eyes. Alyssa, you're coming back, right? This isn't really going to end in divorce, is it? But it is. It's too late to cancel it now. From now on, please indulge your beloved sister to your heart's content and support each other. I said this with heavy sarcasm, throwing the words back at him. However, I truly felt sorry for the children. Due to our selfish reasons, they were losing their father and the home they had lived in. Nevertheless, if I had continued to let those two dictate my life, my savings would have been devoured, and even the future of these children would have been at risk. I refused to have my life thrown into disarray by such unreasonable siblings. I moved back to my parents' house, where I explained the situation and asked to stay for a while. After explaining things in simple terms, the children accepted the situation, saying, "As long as Mom is with us, that's fine. And Mom has always been there for us." Greg kept contacting me persistently after that, but now I block all his calls. The divorce has already been finalized, and I plan to hire a lawyer to ensure child support payments. Meanwhile, Megan and her husband also divorced soon after. She claimed to have used the savings for living expenses, but it turned out she had been splurging on luxury brands. When Megan's husband secretly searched her room, he was shocked to find a large stash of luxury goods. As a result, she was forced into divorce and had to reimburse the $50,000 she had spent without mercy. She managed to return about $20,000 with what was left of Greg's modest savings. But she will have to work to pay back the remaining $30,000. Now that the divorce is settled, I have to pay the property division. Please help me. She tried to appeal to her parents with her usual crying antics. But since I had already explained everything to them, they quickly refused her. Not only Megan, but Greg too was severely reprimanded. And they both ended up being disowned. Really, those siblings are beyond saving. At least I hope they manage without causing trouble for others. I'm truly glad that Greg and Megan didn't end up taking it from me. I will continue to use this money carefully to ensure my children grow up well.
I took one look at Caleb's face and knew something was wrong. His eyes were glazed over, his jaw clenched tight. "Caleb, your father was in a serious accident. He fell off the roof while fixing it." He barely reacted, just a slight raise of his eyebrows. "What do you want me to do? My conference call is starting." I couldn't believe his indifference. "He's in critical condition. We need to go to the hospital." Caleb waved a dismissive hand. "Honestly, it saves me the trouble of dealing with his crap." My heart sank as he turned away, already focused on his laptop and that stupid call. I grabbed my purse and hurried out, tears stinging my eyes. What happened to the man I married? At the hospital, a grim-faced doctor updated me on Walter's condition: traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, and internal bleeding. It didn't look good. I tried calling Caleb during his lunch break, but he didn't pick up. When he finally came home that evening, I confronted him. "Your father could die, and you didn't even show up." Caleb loosened his tie like my words meant nothing. "I have a client dinner tonight. Handle this yourself." The callousness in his voice made me sick. "He's your family, Caleb. Don't you care at all?" "He always belittled me," he snapped. "Now his retirement funds can finally become mine." I stared at this stranger before me, realizing our marriage was already dead. The man I loved was gone, replaced by this cold, greedy shell. As I lay awake that night, I knew things would never be the same. Over the next few days, Walter's condition remained critical. The nurses filled me in on the gruesome details: brain hemorrhaging, collapsed lungs, and severe internal injuries. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was Caleb checking in, but he never called. Finally, I caught him during his lunch break. "Caleb, it's your father?" "The doctors say it's really bad." There was a long pause before he replied, his tone flat. "Look, Hazel, I don't have time for this right now. Can we talk later?" "Don't you even care?" I cried, my voice cracking. He could be dying. We both know my old man's a fighter, he said dismissively. I'm sure he'll pull through. I wanted to scream at him to make him understand how much pain Walter was in, but Caleb had already checked out of the conversation. That night, I waited up until well past midnight, the house dark and silent. When Caleb finally strutted through the door, I could smell the whiskey on his breath. There you are, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Your father's hanging on by a thread at the hospital. Caleb shrugged off his suit jacket. And? What do you want from me, Hazel? My mouth fell open at his indifference. This was his own flesh and blood. I want you to act like you have a heart, I shouted, to show some basic human decency and compassion. Caleb's gaze turned ice cold. You know how my father treated me growing up. He got what he deserved with that fall. I recoiled, horrified by his cruel words. In that moment, I saw him for the monster he truly was. As the days went by, I split my time between work and the hospital, holding vigil by Walter's bedside. Caleb didn't so much as call or visit once. His selfishness and greed had fully consumed him. As the weeks dragged on, memories of the past kept resurfacing. I recalled the tense family dinners when Walter would grill Caleb about his grades and career ambitions. No matter how well Caleb did, it was never enough for his domineering father. You need to toughen up and stop being so sensitive, Walter would bark. The corporate world won't coddle you. Young Caleb would shrink back, lips pressed into a thin line as he nodded obediently. But I saw the resentment flickering in his eyes, anger simmering just beneath the surface. Now, sitting by Walter's bedside, I couldn't help but connect the dots between that childhood trauma and Caleb's disturbing indifference today. Had his father's emotional abuse irrevocably damaged their relationship? My friends tried convincing me to cut Caleb loose. He's shown you who he really is, Hazel. Why are you still putting up with his crap? Part of me knew they were right, but another part, the part still clinging to the man I fell in love with years ago, couldn't let go so easily. The hospital staff saw my internal struggle play out daily. You can't keep running yourself ragged like this, the nurses would gently chide me. If you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to take care of him. Reluctantly, I started scaling back my hours at work, despite the looming deadlines. If Caleb wasn't going to step up for his own father, then I would have to shoulder that responsibility myself. A few days later, during a routine visit, one of Walter's eyes fluttered open while I was sitting next to him. "Walter?" I gasped, grabbing his hand. "Can you hear me? Squeeze if you can." His battered fingers twitched ever so slightly against my palm. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly replaced by dread over how to break the news to his callous son. I tried calling Caleb right away to share the good news about Walter, but he didn't pick up. Not that I was surprised at this point. When he finally sauntered in around midnight, I could tell from the sly grin on his face that he'd been out with his slimy coworkers again. "Where have you been?" I demanded, hands on my hips. "I've been trying to reach you all evening." Caleb poured himself a scotch, not even looking at me. "Just out with the boys, blowing off some steam." "Well, your father's condition has changed," I said, hoping to finally get a reaction out of him. "He's regained consciousness." Caleb paused, the glass halfway to his lips. For a fleeting moment, I saw a glimmer of something in his eyes. Surprise? Concern? It was quickly extinguished by a callous shrug. "I'm sure the old man will milk this for all it's worth," he muttered before downing his drink. My jaw went slack at his unbelievable insensitivity. How could he be so heartless towards his own family? The next few days passed in a painful funk. Caleb continued his neglectful behavior, stumbling in at ungodly hours reeking of alcohol and perfume that definitely wasn't mine. Then one night, he didn't even try to be discreet. A ledgy blonde in a tight red dress waltzed right in after him, giggling drunkenly. "Who is she?" I gasped, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Caleb draped his arm around her shoulders. "Hazel, meet Linda. Linda Monroe. The woman, Linda." Smirked at me like we were rivals. "Nice to finally meet you." You've been cheating on me?" I sputtered, struggling to process the betrayal. "Guilty," Caleb said with a shameless grin. He tossed a manila envelope at my feet. "Sign those divorce papers and you'll be free of me for good." The room started spinning as I opened the envelope with trembling hands. There it was in black and white. Our marriage was over. Just like that. In the days after Caleb dropped that bombshell, I felt numb, like I was moving through a waking nightmare. I poured all my energy into visiting Walter at the hospital, if only to escape the suffocating misery at home. To my relief, Walter's condition was slowly improving. The nurses said he was responding well to treatment and could likely be discharged to a rehab facility soon. I tried sharing these hopeful updates with Caleb, but he just scoffed and changed the subject. Then one afternoon, as I was sitting by Walter's bedside, his eyes fluttered open again. This time, they focused on me with startling clarity. "Hazel." His gravelly voice was little more than a whisper. I grasped his hand, fighting back tears of joy. "I'm here, Walter. You're going to be okay." He squeezed my fingers with what little strength he had. "I'm not blind, you know. I've seen how Caleb's been treating you, and me." My heart sank as I nodded mutely. There was no use denying the truth anymore. Walter's expression hardened. "He's planning to take everything once I'm gone, isn't he?" "Yes," I admitted quietly. "He served me with divorce papers the other night, said it would free him of his burden." Anger flashed in Walter's eyes, giving him a sudden burst of energy. "That ungrateful little—" He trailed off, sucking in a pained breath. I leaned forward, squeezing his hand again. "What is it? What were you going to say?" Walter fixed me with an intense stare. "Not if we play our cards right, Hazel. Are you with me?" I didn't hesitate. After everything Caleb had put us through, I was done being a helpless victim. "I'm in. What did you have in mind?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of Walter's cracked lips. "We're going to take back what's rightfully yours and leave that scumbag son of mine with nothing." Over the next few weeks, Walter and I hatched our plan in hushed conversations at the hospital. He insisted on keeping things discreet until the time was right to strike. Finally, after being discharged to a rehab facility, Walter gave me the green light. "Get Caleb and that mistress of his over to the house this Saturday. I want to see the look on their smug faces." I tried to mask my nervousness as I called Caleb that week. "Hey, your father wanted to have us all over for dinner on Saturday. You know, one last family meal before—" "Before the old man kicks the bucket?" Caleb finished with a snort. "Yeah, I suppose we can humor him. Linda and I will be there." When Saturday evening arrived, Caleb strutted through the door with Linda clinging to his arm, both of them looking completely at ease. My stomach twisted into knots seeing them like that in my home. "All right, Pops, we're here," Caleb announced as they sauntered into the living room. "What's so important that you—" He trailed off, eyes widening, because there was Walter sitting upright in his wheelchair, staring them down with undisguised contempt. You're awake?" Caleb sputtered. Walter's mouth curled into a cold smile. "Surprised? You really shouldn't be. I raised you better than this, Caleb. Or so I thought." Caleb and Linda exchanged a panicked look as the blood drained from their faces. Clearly this wasn't the feeble, helpless old man they were expecting. "What's going on here?" Linda hissed, clutching Caleb's arm. Walter turned his withering glare on her. "Miss Monroe, I suggest you exit this conversation before it gets truly unpleasant." She opened her mouth to protest, but Caleb silenced her with a shake of his head. Smart man, knowing when to fold. "What do you want from us?" Caleb asked tightly. "Isn't it obvious?" Walter replied. "I want to avoid having my entire life's work, my legacy, inherited by an ungrateful, dishonorable snake like you." Caleb's face turned an ugly shade of red as Walter's words hit home. For the first time, a flicker of fear entered his eyes. "What are you saying?" he demanded through gritted teeth. "That you're cutting me out? After everything I've done for this family?" Walter barked out a harsh laugh. "Done for the family? Don't make me laugh, boy. You've been working against us this whole time with your selfish scheming." Caleb opened his mouth, but I cut him off, suddenly feeling emboldened. "Don't even try denying it. We know all about your shady dealings at the law firm." Reaching into my purse, I pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it on the coffee table with a thud. Bank statements, phone records, everything implicating you in financial misconduct and misappropriation of client funds. Caleb went deathly pale as he stared at the damning evidence. Linda was gaping at him in shock and horror. You set me up?" Caleb wheezed, turning to his mistress. "Is that what this is?" Linda quickly shook her head, backing away from him. "No, Caleb, I swear. I didn't know any of this." I felt a pang of satisfaction seeing the panic in her eyes as she realized her little fantasy world was crumbling. "That's not all, son," Walter interjected coldly. "There's also the matter of my will." Caleb's head whipped around so fast I thought his neck might snap. "Your will?" "Indeed." Walter straightened up in his wheelchair. "A recent amendment stating that in order to inherit my assets and my share of the construction business, you must be considered in good standing with the family." He let that bombshell linger for a moment before delivering the killing blow. "Which, after the way you've treated Hazel and me these past months, you most certainly are not." Caleb looked like he'd been gut-punched as the realization set in. Not only had he lost his inheritance, he might be facing criminal charges and disbarment as well. You can't do this," he sputtered weakly. But the fight had already drained from his eyes, replaced by the hollow, empty stare of a man who knew he'd lost everything. The divorce proceedings with Caleb were thankfully swift and clean. He put up little resistance, likely realizing how damning the evidence against him was. Within a matter of weeks, that chapter of my life was officially closed. As for Linda, well, let's just say she didn't take too kindly to being deceived and used as a pawn. I overheard a nasty confrontation between them outside the courthouse, her shrill voice echoing off the stone walls. "You lied to me, Caleb. About everything. Your money, your future, all of it." His reply was little more than a pathetic mumble. "Linda, baby, you've got to understand." "Don't baby me, you scumbag. We're through, completely through." The clicking of her heels faded away, leaving Caleb alone with the wreckage of his selfish decisions. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction seeing his world crumble. In the months that followed, I focused my energy on getting the family construction business back in order. Walter had fortunately reversed course just in time, amending his will to leave me as the primary inheritor and trustee. "You're the only one I can trust to do the right thing, Hazel," he told me gruffly. Though his body remained frail, there was a renewed spark in his eyes. "This company was my life's work. I want to see it restored to its former glory." With those words etched in my mind, I rolled up my sleeves and dug into the company finances. Needless to say, years of Caleb's unchecked greed and mismanagement had taken their toll. But I was determined to right those wrongs, no matter how daunting the task. I made the tough decisions, downsizing, restructuring, even selling off certain assets to get us back on solid footing. All the while, I kept Walter looped in, knowing his sharp eye for detail would help guide us. Slowly but surely, the renewed spirit of integrity began permeating every level of the business. Jobs were completed on time, clients were satisfied, and our reputation started to rebuild. Sadly, Walter didn't live to see the complete revitalization. But in his final months, I made sure to keep him involved every step of the way, knowing how much this all meant to him. "You've made me proud, Hazel," he wheezed one afternoon, grasping my hand with what little strength he had left. "Finally putting things right like they should have been all along." Tears blurred my vision as I leaned down and gently kissed his forehead. "For you, Walter, and for me, for a fresh start and a legacy we can be proud of." The buzzing of my phone jolted me awake. I fumbled in the dark, my heart racing as I squinted at the bright screen. 3:17 a.m. Who could be texting at this hour? Mike's name flashed across the top, and a chill ran down my spine. I glanced over at my husband's empty side of the bed. He was working the night shift at the mall again, or so he'd said. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the phone and read the message. "Sorry, babe, won't make it home tonight, covering for Jim." My stomach churned. This was the third time this month he'd stayed out all night. I scrolled through his recent messages, my suspicion growing with each swipe. "Can't wait to see you again. Miss your touch. You're so beautiful." None of these were to me. I set the phone down, my hands shaking. The bedroom suddenly felt suffocating. I stumbled to the bathroom, flicking on the harsh fluorescent light. My reflection stared back at me, tired eyes and thinning hair that Mike never failed to point out. "You're being paranoid, Emily," I whispered to myself, but the knot in my stomach wouldn't loosen. A soft knock on the door made me jump. "Mom?" Kelly's voice called out. "Is everything okay?" I opened the door to find my daughter, bleary-eyed but concerned. "Sorry, sweetie. Did I wake you?" She shook her head. "I heard you get up. Is it Dad again?" The perceptiveness in her eyes made my heart ache. At 18, she shouldn't have to worry about her parents' marriage. I forced a smile. "It's nothing, honey. Go back to bed." Kelly hesitated, then said, "Mom, there's something I need to tell you about Dad." My breath caught in my throat. "What is it?" She bit her lip, looking torn. I saw him yesterday, at the coffee shop near the mall. He was with someone." "A coworker?" I asked, clinging to hope. Kelly shook her head slowly. "It was a woman I've never seen before. They looked close." The room spun around me. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. "Are you sure?" "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't want to say anything, but after seeing his text..." She gestured towards the phone on my nightstand. I took a deep breath, trying to process this information. "Thank you for telling me, Kelly. We'll figure this out, okay?" She nodded, giving me a quick hug before retreating to her room. I sank onto the bed, my mind racing. After 20 years of marriage, could Mike really be cheating on me? I thought back to our arranged marriage, orchestrated by our parents who thought we'd be a perfect match. Mike, the charming janitor with big dreams, and me, the dedicated nurse. We'd made it work, or so I thought. The first rays of sunlight were peeking through the curtains when I heard the front door open. Mike's heavy footsteps echoed through the house. I steeled myself, determined to confront him. He appeared in the doorway, looking surprised to see me awake. "Emily, what are you doing up so early?" I held up his phone, my voice steadier than I felt. "Care to explain these messages, Mike?" His face paled, then quickly morphed into a mask of innocence. "What messages? You know I hate when you go through my phone." "Don't turn this around on me," I snapped. "Who is she?" Mike's jaw clenched. "It's nothing, just a friend." "A friend you can't wait to see again? A friend you miss touching?" My voice cracked, betraying my hurt. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "Look, Emily, it's not what you think. You're overreacting as usual." "As usual?" I stood up, anger replacing my sadness. "You mean like how I overreact when you constantly criticize my appearance? My thinning hair?" Mike's eyes narrowed. "Maybe if you took better care of yourself." "Stop," I cut him off. "Just stop. I want the truth, Mike. Are you having an affair?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mike's gaze dropped to the floor, and in that moment, I knew. My world shattered, leaving me standing amidst the ruins of our marriage, wondering how I'd ever put the pieces back together. The hospital corridors felt colder than usual as I made my rounds. My mind kept drifting back to Mike's half-hearted denials and the look in his eyes when I confronted him. I shook my head, trying to focus on my patients. They deserved better than a distracted nurse. "Emily?" Dr. Patel's voice snapped me back to reality. "Are you all right? You seem a bit off today." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a bit tired. What can I do for you?" He handed me a chart. "Mrs. Well Johnson in 305 needs her meds, and Emily, if you need to talk, my door's always open." I nodded gratefully and headed to Mrs. Johnson's room. As I administered her medication, she studied me with wise, wrinkled eyes. "Trouble at home, dear?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then sighed. "Is it that obvious?" She patted my hand. "When you've been around as long as I have, you learn to read people. Don't let it dim your light, honey." Her words struck a chord. How long had I been letting Mike dim my light? I thought back to the early days of our marriage. He'd been so charming then, full of big dreams. But as the years passed, those dreams never materialized. Instead, he bounced from job to job while I worked long hours at the hospital to keep us afloat. My shift ended, and I dreaded going home. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Mike. "Working late again. Don't wait up." I gripped the steering wheel, anger bubbling up inside me. How many nights had I heard that excuse? How many times had I rearranged my schedule to accommodate his ever-changing jobs? At home, I found Kelly in the kitchen, attempting to cook dinner. The smell of burnt pasta filled the air. "Oh, Mom," she exclaimed. "I wanted to surprise you, but I think I messed up." I couldn't help but laugh. "It's the thought that counts, sweetie. How about we order pizza instead?" As we sat eating, Kelly cleared her throat. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey. Why do you let Dad treat you the way he does?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She set down her slice, looking serious. "The way he criticizes you all the time, especially about your hair. It's not right, Mom." I touched my thinning hair self-consciously. Mike's voice echoed in my head. "You're letting yourself go, Emily." No wonder I have to work so hard to look at you. It's complicated, Kelly, I said weakly. No, it's not, she insisted. You deserve better. You're beautiful, Mom, and smart and kind. Dad's an idiot if he can't see that. Tears welled up in my eyes. When did my daughter become so wise? Just then the front door slammed. Mike stumbled in, reeking of alcohol. Where's my dinner? He demanded. I stood up, anger replacing my earlier sadness. You said you were working late. We didn't know when you'd be home. He scoffed. Right, because it's so hard to keep a plate warm. What do you even do all day, Emily? Kelly jumped to her feet. She saves lives, Dad. What do you do besides criticize her? Mike's face darkened. Watch your tone, young lady. This is between your mother and me. No, I said firmly, surprising myself. Kelly's right. I'm tired of your criticism, Mike. I'm tired of feeling like I'm not enough. He laughed bitterly. Not enough? Look at yourself, Emily. Your hair's falling out. You've gained weight. You're hardly the woman I married. The words stung, but I stood my ground. And you're hardly the man I thought I married. A man who respects his wife, who contributes to his family. Mike's eyes narrowed. You want to talk about contributions? Who do you think pays for this roof over your head? I do, I shouted, years of frustration pouring out. I pay the mortgage, the bills, Kelly's tuition. What do you contribute besides empty promises and cruel words? The silence that followed was deafening. Mike stared at me, shock and anger warring on his face. Kelly looked between us, worry etched in her features. Finally, Mike spoke, his voice low and dangerous. If that's how you feel, maybe I should just leave. My heart pounded, but I held firm. Maybe you should. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. As the sound echoed through the house, I realized with startling clarity that our marriage was beyond repair. And for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as I sipped my coffee, lost in thought. It had been 3 days since Mike stormed out, and the house felt eerily quiet without his constant criticism. Kelly shuffled in, her eyes puffy from lack of sleep. Any word from Dad? I shook my head. Nothing. But don't worry, honey. We'll be okay. She nodded, then hesitated. Mom, there's something I need to tell you about Dad. My heart sank. What is it? Kelly took a deep breath. Remember when I told you I saw him at the coffee shop? Well, I didn't tell you everything. He was with a woman, young, brunette, and they were kissing. The mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. Hot coffee splashed my legs, but I barely felt it. Are you sure? Kelly nodded, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have told you sooner. I hugged her tightly, my mind reeling. It's not your fault, sweetie. Thank you for telling me. After Kelly left for school, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at Mike's number on my phone. My finger hovered over the call button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. Instead, I dialed another number. Ace Investigations, how can I help you? An hour later, I sat across from Jack Reeves, a private investigator with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. So, Mrs. Roberts, you suspect your husband is having an affair? I nodded, twisting my wedding ring. I need to know for sure. Can you help me? Jack leaned forward. We'll get to the bottom of this, ma'am, but I have to warn you. Are you prepared for what we might find? Was I? The thought of concrete proof made my stomach churn. But I squared my shoulders and met his gaze. Yes, I need the truth. Over the next week, I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety. Jack called with updates, each one chipping away at my hope. Mike's late nights weren't at the mall. His work trips were to a nearby hotel. Finally, Jack asked me to meet him at a cafe downtown. As I approached, I saw him sitting at an outdoor table, a thick envelope in front of him. Mrs. Roberts, he said gently, I have the evidence you asked for. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Mike with a young brunette, holding hands, kissing, entering a hotel. My vision blurred as I flipped through them. I'm sorry, Jack said softly. I nodded, unable to speak. As I gathered the photos, a familiar figure caught my eye. I froze, my blood running cold. Mrs. Roberts, are you all right? I held up one of the photos, my voice barely a whisper. I know her. Jack leaned in. The woman your husband's with. Yes, I say, anger replacing shock. It's Linda, Mike's mother. Jack's eyes widened. His mother? I shook my head, memories flooding back. Not his biological mother, his stepmother. She married Mike's father when Mike was in his 20s. She's only a few years older than him. The pieces started falling into place. Linda's hostility towards me, the knowing looks between her and Mike at family gatherings. How could I have been so blind? "Mrs. Roberts," Jack said gently, "what do you want to do now?" I stood up, a strange calm settling over me. "Now, I want a divorce." As I walked home, my phone buzzed. A text from Mike. "We need to talk. I'm coming home tonight." I stared at the screen, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me wanted to confront him, to scream and demand answers. But another part, a stronger part, knew it was time to take control of my life. I typed a reply, "Don't bother. I know about Linda. Your things will be on the porch. Don't come inside." My finger hovered over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. Taking a deep breath, I pressed send and watched as my message delivered, signaling the end of my marriage and the beginning of a new chapter in my life. As I walked up to my house, I saw Kelly waiting on the porch, concern etched on her face. I realized then that while one chapter was ending, the most important one, my life with my daughter, was still being written. And this time, I would make sure it had a happier ending. The weight of the manila envelope felt like a ton of bricks in my hands as I paced the living room. Inside were the divorce papers I had drawn up, a decision that had taken every ounce of courage I possessed. Kelly watched me from the couch, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and support. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" she asked softly. I paused, meeting her gaze. "I have to be, honey. We deserve better than this." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made my heart race. Mike was home. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. "Kelly, why don't you go to your room?" I suggested, not wanting her to witness what was about to unfold. She hesitated, then nodded, giving me a quick hug before disappearing upstairs. The front door opened, and Mike stumbled in, reeking of alcohol. "Emily?" he called out, his words slurring slightly. "Where's my dinner?" I stepped into the hallway, the envelope clutched to my chest like a shield. "We need to talk, Mike." He squinted at me, then at the envelope. "What's that?" Without a word, I handed it to him. He fumbled with the clasp, pulling out the papers. As his eyes scanned the first page, his face contorted from confusion to shock, then anger. "Divorce papers," he spat. "What the hell is this?" "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want a divorce." Mike laughed bitterly. "You can't be serious, after everything I've done for you?" "Everything you've done?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. "You mean the lies, the affairs, the constant criticism?" His eyes narrowed. "Affairs? What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone, bringing up the photos the private investigator had sent me. "I know about Linda, Mike. Your stepmother? Really?" The color drained from his face as I showed him the evidence. For a moment, he looked like he might crumple, but then his expression hardened. "You had me followed?" he growled. "You invaded my privacy?" "Don't you dare turn this around on me," I shot back. "You've been cheating on me with your stepmother. You've made me feel worthless for years. It ends now." Mike's fist slammed against the wall, making me flinch. "You can't do this to me, Emily. I was going to leave you after retirement, take my pension, and start over. You're ruining everything." His words hit me like a slap in the face. "You were planning to leave me? After all these years?" He sneered. "Look at you. Your hair's falling out. You've let yourself go. Did you really think I'd stick around forever?" Something snapped inside me. Years of pent-up anger and hurt came pouring out. "I've supported us for years while you jumped from job to job. I've raised our daughter, paid our bills, and put up with your abuse. No more, Mike. It's over. You'll regret this." He snarled, crumpling the divorce papers in his fist. "I'll make sure you don't get a penny." I stood my ground, meeting his gaze. "Try it. I have evidence of your affair, your financial negligence. Do you really want to take this to court?" For a moment, fear flashed in his eyes. Then, without another word, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I sank to the floor, my legs giving out as the adrenaline faded. Kelly appeared at the top of the stairs, tears in her eyes. "Mom?" she called softly. "Are you okay?" I looked up at her, managing a small smile. "I will be, honey. We both will be." As Kelly came down to sit beside me, I realized that this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both of us, one where we wouldn't let anyone make us feel small ever again. "What happens now?" Kelly asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her, feeling a newfound strength coursing through me. Now, we rebuild. Together. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. Squinting at the clock, I saw it was barely 5 a.m. My heart raced as I answered, "Hello? Emily. It's Carol, your mother-in-law." Her voice was tight with worry. "Mike's here. He's not in a good state." I sat up, fully alert now. "What do you mean?" "He's drunk, ranting about divorce papers and how you're trying to ruin him." "Emily, what's going on?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Carol, I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. Mike's been having an affair with Linda." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Carol spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Linda? His stepmother?" "Yes," I confirmed, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "I have proof. I'm filing for divorce." Carol's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Oh, Emily, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I assured her. "This isn't your fault." "He wants to talk to you," Carol said suddenly. "He's demanding it. Should I put him on?" My instinct was to refuse, but something made me hesitate. "Okay," I heard myself say. Mike's voice came through, slurred and angry. "Emily, you can't do this to me. I'll fight you every step of the way." "Mike, it's over," I said firmly. "We both know it." "You think you can just throw me away?" he snarled. "After everything? I made you who you are." His words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment I was that insecure young woman again, desperate for his approval. But then I thought of Kelly, of the strength I'd found in standing up to him. "No, Mike," I said, my voice steady. "I made myself who I am, despite you, not because of you." He laughed bitterly. "You're nothing without me, Emily. Your thinning hair, your—" I cut him off. "Goodbye, Mike. Don't call again unless it's through our lawyers." I ended the call, my hands shaking. As I set the phone down, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. My hair, the source of so much of Mike's criticism, seemed to mock me. Without thinking, I grabbed a pair of scissors from my dresser. Strand by strand, I began to cut. With each snip, I felt a weight lifting. By the time Kelly found me, tear-streaked and surrounded by fallen hair, I felt lighter than I had in years. "Mom?" Kelly's voice was filled with concern. "What happened?" I turned to her, managing a small smile. "I'm taking control, honey. No more letting your father's words define me." Kelly's eyes widened, then softened with understanding. She grabbed another pair of scissors. "Let me help you even it out." As we worked together, I filled Kelly in on Mike's call. Her jaw clenched with anger, but she remained focused on the task at hand. "You know," she said, as she trimmed the back of my hair, "Aunt Sarah went through something similar with her ex. She said the hardest part was facing everyone after." I hadn't thought about that. The idea of facing our friends, our extended family, filled me with dread. But then I caught sight of my new reflection, shorter hair, tear-stained cheeks, but eyes bright with determination. "We'll face them together," I said, squeezing Kelly's hand. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Linda. "We need to talk. Meet me at the cafe on 5th at noon." My stomach churned. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to cut all ties with that part of my life. But another part, the part that had found the strength to stand up to Mike, knew this was a conversation I needed to have. I showed Kelly the text. "What do you think?" She studied it for a moment, then looked at me with a mix of concern and pride. "I think you should go, Mom. You deserve answers." I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. This meeting with Linda could go 1,000 different ways, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to face whatever came my way. As I got ready to leave, I caught my reflection one last time. The woman staring back at me wasn't perfect. Her hair was uneven, her eyes tired, but I was strong. But she was ready. I was ready. The cafe bustled with the lunch crowd as I sat across from Linda, my soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law, and the woman who'd been having an affair with my husband. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Emily," Linda began, her voice low, "I know you must hate me." I stared at her, my emotions a tangled mess. "Hate is too simple a word for what I feel, Linda." She nodded, looking down at her untouched coffee. "I understand, but there's something you need to know about Mike, something that might affect your divorce settlement." My guard went up immediately. "What are you talking about?" Linda took a deep breath. "Mike's in debt, serious debt. He's been gambling, Emily, for years." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Gambling? But how? Where did he get the money?" "He's been dipping into his retirement fund," Linda explained, her face grim. "And He took out a second mortgage on your house without telling you. My mind reeled. Our house, the home where I'd raised Kelly, where I'd poured my heart and soul, was at risk. How much? I managed to ask. Linda slid a piece of paper across the table. The number written on it made my blood run cold. This can't be right, I whispered. I'm afraid it is, Linda said softly. Emily, I'm so sorry for everything. The affair, keeping this from you. I thought I loved him, but Mike, he's not the man either of us thought he was. I barely heard her apology, my mind racing with the implications. If this was true, the divorce settlement I'd been counting on, the fresh start I'd been planning for Kelly and me, was in jeopardy. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Emily, we need to talk. New information has come to light about Mike's finances. Call me ASAP. I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my chair. I have to go. Linda reached out, grabbing my wrist. Emily, wait, there's more. I paused, dreading what else she could possibly tell me. Mike, he's planning to contest the divorce. He's going to claim you were emotionally abusive, that you drove him to the affair. He's going to try to take everything, Emily. The room spun around me. I yanked my arm free and stumbled out of the cafe, gasping for air. On the sidewalk, I fumbled with my phone, dialing my lawyer with shaking hands. As it rang, I caught sight of my reflection in a store window. My new, shorter haircut, a symbol of my newfound strength, seemed to mock me now. Emily? My lawyer's voice came through. I'm glad you called. We need to discuss. I know, I cut him off. I just found out about the debt, the gambling, all of it. What do we do? He sighed heavily. It's not good, Emily. Mike's financial situation complicates things significantly, and if he contests the divorce as he's threatening to. He can't win, I said, my voice rising with panic. He can't take everything. I have proof of the affair. Infidelity doesn't carry as much weight as you might think in court, he explained gently, and if he can make a case for emotional abuse. I leaned against the building, feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. Everything I'd fought for, the future I'd envisioned for Kelly and me, was slipping away. Just then, I saw Mike across the street, emerging from a pawn shop. Our eyes met, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He knew he had the upper hand. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The fear and panic gave way to a white-hot rage. I'd let Mike control me for too long, let him make me feel small and worthless. No more. Emily? My lawyer's voice sounded distant. Are you still there? What do you want to do? I watched Mike saunter away, his arrogance palpable even from a distance. My jaw clenched, determination flooding through me. Fight, I said, my voice steel. We fight with everything we've got. I won't let him win. Not this time. As I ended the call, I knew the real battle was just beginning. But for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt truly ready. Mike might think he held all the cards, but he was about to learn that he'd underestimated me for the last time. The bridal shop's bell chimed as Kelly twirled in her wedding gown, her face radiant with joy. My heart swelled with pride and love, momentarily pushing aside the storm of the ongoing divorce battle. Mom, what do you think? Kelly asked, her eyes sparkling. I blinked back tears. You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart. As Kelly changed back into her regular clothes, my phone buzzed. It was my lawyer. With trembling fingers, I answered. Emily, we've hit a snag, he said, his voice grave. Mike's lawyer is pushing for a larger share of your assets, citing your emotional abuse as grounds for compensation. My stomach dropped. But that's ridiculous. He's the one who... I know, my lawyer cut in, but they're presenting a compelling case. We need to consider settling, Emily. The longer this drags on, the more you stand to lose. I ended the call, feeling numb. Kelly emerged from the dressing room, her smile fading as she saw my expression. Mom, what's wrong? I forced a smile. Nothing, honey, just some legal stuff. Kelly's eyes narrowed. Is it Dad? What's he done now? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Mike. We need to talk, for Kelly's sake. I showed Kelly the message, watching her face cloud over. You're not going to meet him, are you? She asked. I sighed. I think I have to, sweetie, for the sake of ending this nightmare. Kelly grabbed my hand. Then I'm coming with you. An hour later, we sat across from Mike in a quiet corner of a local diner. He looked haggard, his eyes darting between Kelly and me. Kelly, he began, his voice hoarse. I'm so sorry for everything. I want to make things right. Kelly's jaw clenched. By trying to take everything from Mom? By lying about her in court? Mike flinched. It's complicated, honey. Your mother. Don't you dare, I cut in, my voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare try to turn her against me. Mike's eyes hardened. Fine, let's cut to the chase. I want to come to the wedding, Emily. It's my right as her father. Kelly stood up abruptly. No, absolutely not. Kelly, please, Mike pleaded. I know I've made mistakes, but... Mistakes? Kelly's voice rose. You cheated on Mom with Linda. You gambled away our future. You're trying to destroy Mom in court. Those aren't mistakes, Dad. Those are choices. Mike's face reddened. Now listen here. No, you listen, I interjected, finding strength in Kelly's words. You've made your choices, Mike. Now live with them. You're not coming to the wedding. You're not getting more than you deserve in the divorce, and you're certainly not going to bully us anymore. Mike's hand slammed on the table. You can't do this to me. I'll fight you every step of the way. You'll what? Kelly challenged. Tell more lies, gamble away more money. Face it, Dad, you've lost. Not just the divorce, but us. With that, Kelly stormed out of the diner. I stood to follow her, but Mike grabbed my arm. Emily, please, he begged, his voice breaking. Don't let it end like this. We can start over, be a family again. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved. But then I remembered the years of criticism, the affair, the lies. I gently removed his hand. Goodbye, Mike, I said softly. I hope you find peace. As I walked out of the diner, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The battle wasn't over. There were still legal hurdles to overcome. But for the first time, I truly believed I would win. Outside, I found Kelly leaning against my car, tears streaming down her face. I pulled her into a tight hug. I'm so proud of you, I whispered. Kelly pulled back, wiping her eyes. I'm proud of us, Mom. We're going to be okay, aren't we? I nodded, a genuine smile spreading across my face. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be more than okay. As we drove home, I realized that this wasn't just about winning the divorce or outsmarting Mike. It was about reclaiming our lives, our happiness. And with Kelly by my side, I knew we could face anything that came our way. The road ahead might be challenging, but for the first time in years, I was excited to see where it would lead us. The gentle breeze carried the scent of roses as I stood in the garden, watching Kelly and her new husband, James, share their first dance as a married couple. The soft melody of their chosen song drifted through the air, and I found myself swaying slightly, a contented smile on my face. It had been a year since the divorce was finalized, a year of rebuilding and rediscovering myself. The legal battle had been brutal, but in the end, truth prevailed. Mike's lies unraveled in court, and his attempts to paint me as the villain backfired spectacularly. The judge saw through his deceit, and I walked away with a fair settlement and my dignity intact. As the dance ended, Kelly caught my eye and beckoned me over. I made my way through the crowd of well-wishers, accepting hugs and congratulations along the way. Mom, Kelly beamed, pulling me into a tight embrace. Can you believe it? I'm married. I laughed, blinking back tears of joy. I can, sweetheart. You and James are perfect for each other. James grinned, wrapping an arm around Kelly's waist. We have something for you, Emily, he said, reaching into his pocket. Kelly's eyes sparkled with excitement as James pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped package. Go on, Mom, open it. With trembling fingers, I unwrapped the gift. Inside was a stunning silk scarf, its vibrant colors shimmering in the late afternoon sun. It's beautiful, I breathed, running my fingers over the soft fabric. Kelly stepped forward, gently taking the scarf and draping it around my shoulders. We wanted you to have something special, she said softly. Something to remind you how beautiful and strong you are. I touched the scarf, feeling a lump form in my throat. For so long, I had let Mike's cruel words about my thinning hair define me. But now, surrounded by love and acceptance, I realized how far I'd come. Thank you, I whispered, pulling them both into a hug. This means more than you know. As the reception continued, I found myself by the garden's edge, lost in thought. The setting sun cast a warm glow over the festivities, and I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. Penny for your thoughts? A familiar voice asked. I turned to see Carol, my former mother-in-law, standing beside me. Our relationship had been strained during the divorce, but we'd found our way back to each other in the months that followed. Just thinking about how much has changed, I replied honestly. Carol nodded, her eyes kind. You've come so far, Emily. I hope you know how proud we all are of you. I smiled, touching the scarf around my neck. I'm proud of myself, too. For the first time in years, I feel free. As if on cue, the band struck up a lively tune. Carol grinned, holding out her hand. Care to dance? Laughing, I took her hand and let her lead me to the dance floor. As we twirled and swayed, I caught sight of Kelly and James, their faces alight with love and joy. My heart swelled with hope for their future, a future free from the pain and doubt that had clouded my own marriage. Later, as the night wound down and guests began to depart, Kelly found me once more. Mom, she said, her voice soft and serious, I just wanted to say thank you for everything, for showing me what real strength looks like. I cupped her face in my hands, overwhelmed with love for this incredible young woman. Oh, Kelly, you've been my strength through all of this. I couldn't have done it without you. As we embraced, I realized that this wasn't just Kelly's new beginning. It was mine, too. The road ahead was full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, I was excited to explore them. The last of the guests departed, leaving just our closest family and friends. As we gathered to see Kelly and James off on their honeymoon, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The scarf around my neck fluttered in the breeze, a reminder of the love and support that surrounded me. Looking up at the star-filled sky, I made a silent wish for Kelly's marriage, for love, respect, and the strength to weather any storm. And as I watched the newlyweds drive away, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The chapter of my life with Mike had closed, but a new one was just beginning. And this time, I was the author of my own story.